anger, learning about the stages of the path to enlightenment. So for the meditation, we're looking at the perfection of patience, which is the opposite of anger, hatred. There is a lot of anger and hatred and even violence in our world right now and also in our country. And as ordinary beings, we still have the seeds of anger and hatred in our minds. We can't start eliminating those until we reach the path of seeing by directly realizing emptiness, and that's not easy to do. So in the meantime, those seeds are still there, and so we're sort of vulnerable to having those seeds triggered, watered, nourished, and then having anger, hatred come up in our minds. So it's, really important that we work hard on learning to manage anger so that when it does arise, it doesn't get out of control, and we get out of control and act it out. So one of the best ways of generating this strong aspiration to work on anger is by seeing its faults of anger. So in the text, Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned visible faults, evident faults. These are things that we can see even here and now in our life. So one is that we don't experience peace of mind and also certainty or confidence. So just check and see if that's true. It also ruins our joy, our happiness. And we have trouble sleeping when we're angry. Our mind doesn't remain at ease. It's restless, agitated. And it can harm relationships with friends, even with family members. So those are some of the visible or evident faults that we can see in this lifetime. But then there are also invisible faults that we can't perceive, but are taught by the Buddha. So the long-term result is that it can cause unfortunate rebirths in lower realms. If we get really angry and act out our anger, we're creating the cause for those rebirths in future lives. And it also destroys virtue, merit, good karma that we've created, meaning we won't be able to experience the wonderful results of our virtue. Then it's also an obstacle to attaining realizations of the path and then the final goals of liberation and enlightenment. So see if you can generate really strong determination to be on the lookout for anger, and when it does arise, to not let your mind be overtaken by it, but instead use antidotes to counteract it and transform your mind into more positive states. So in last week's class, I mentioned that in the middle-length Lamrim that we're going through, the section on patience is quite short, and in the great treatise, the Lamrim Chenmo. It's much longer. So I thought that, maybe it's not necessary to go through everything in this book, because it wasn't so long ago that you had teachings on chapter 6 of Shantideva's Guide by Venerable Children. So maybe that's enough. Then I had a conversation one day with Venerable Deki at lunch. It was just a short conversation, but it changed my mind. Because I realized it was actually quite a few years ago, right? Many years ago that you had the teachings on chapter 6. So maybe it's not so fresh in your mind. And it doesn't hurt to hear these things again and again. It also doesn't hurt me to go through them again and again. And yeah, there is so much anger running, in the world. And I think, because we're easily influenced by other people and what they're doing and what they're saying, and we do still have those seeds in our mind. So we really need to have strong methods, antidotes for anger. So anyway, I thought to go through maybe not every single word of this book, because it is a bit long, but at least to cover the main points. And I did make outlines in case you don't have this book. So did you get the? Yeah, sorry. So seems like Lama Tsongkhapa, his teachings here are mainly based on chapter 6 of Shantideva's text, but he arranges them in a nice outline, very nice and orderly, which I think some people find helpful. And so this is, again, there's 3 types of patience, and the first type of patience is called the patience of disregarding harm, which mainly means, when we are in situations of experiencing harm from others, and of course, the natural response is to get angry. How dare you do that to me, and so on. So it's, quite hard not to get angry in those situations. But the ideal on the Buddhist path is to not, well, even if anger arises in our mind, to not act it out. Not let ourselves act out our anger and then retaliate, which is our instinctive tendency. And it's something we've probably done zillions of times in our past lives, and also in this life, right? So we have that habit of getting angry and retaliating when we encounter harm. So that's a very dangerous situation we want to avoid. So these are methods for dealing with that. Okay, so the outlines, the patience of disregarding harm has 2 main points, which I put letter A, capital letter A and B. So one is stopping impatience with those who harm you. And the second, B, is stopping both dislike for harm doers' attainments and delight in their troubles. So you might remember that from Shantideva, when we're angry at somebody. We're unhappy when something goes well for them, right? That's really annoying. When the enemy experiences something good, we feel, that's not right, they don't deserve that. And then also delight in their troubles. So when they encounter problems, it's like, yay! That's not appropriate for someone following the path, so we have to overcome that. So we'll start with the first one, A, stopping impatience with those who harm you. And that has 2 parts. First is stopping impatience with those who prevent your happiness and those who cause you to suffer. Second is stopping impatience with those who prevent your praise, fame, or honor, and those who have contempt for you or say offensive or unpleasant things to you. Kind of a lot of points there. So we'll start with the first one. I put that in red because that's the one we're going to look at first. So the next slide has the details of that. So, stopping impatience with those who prevent your happiness and those who cause you to suffer. So I was thinking about different ways that people might harm us, and in some cases it's direct harm. They're physically harming, like, hitting or whatever, kicking, biting. So physical harm. Verbal harm is probably more common. People saying things to us that are really hurtful, insulting, cause us to suffer. So that's like direct harm from one person to us. But then there's also indirect harm. I mean, this isn't explained here, but I was just thinking about it. Indirect harm, one form of indirect harm would be when they harm someone or something that is dear to us, right? So that's, someone we care about, a family member, a friend, a pet, and somebody harms that being. In a way, that's harming us too. That makes us suffer. That person, that being is very dear to us. Well, we're attached. That's the problem. We have attachment to them. Or it could be some material thing, a car, a computer, a piece of clothing. Okay, something that belongs to us. And so again, when there's attachment there and we feel that's mine, and nobody has the right to harm that, but if someone does harm that, do something damaging to that, then that's also harming us. And then I was thinking, other situations where we get angry, like angry about what's going on in Gaza, that these aren't really our family members or friends, most of us anyway. But we just feel it's wrong. They're human beings, just like us. They deserve to be happy. They shouldn't be bombed and starved and treated so horribly. So, I don't know, that kind of anger, in a way it's connected with compassion. Having compassion, wishing others to not suffer, can lead to anger about that. But it's still inappropriate, according to Buddhism. But it isn't really directly harming us, right? It's not harming me. Maybe it's just harming my values. Yeah. I don't know, another way of, if you think of some other way of explaining that, but things that we consider important and value and precious and dear, and people are harming that, destroying that. And it's not right. That's wrong. That shouldn't happen. I should stop it. So I know this kind of going off the track here, but anyway, yeah, different situations where there's harm being done, right? There's harm happening, whether it's to us directly or someone or something we cherish, or in a broader sense, things going on in the world that we feel are wrong, unjust, and so on. But mainly what they're talking about in the Buddhist sense is when it's harm to us directly. And that is very challenging, right? It's kind of very difficult not to get angry when the harm is happening to me. Okay, so there's 2 points here, 2 parts. One is showing that anger is justified. That's letter A. What did I say? Oh, sorry. Unjustified. It's unjustified. And then letter B is showing that compassion is appropriate. Okay, so first, showing that anger is unjustified. That has 3 parts. On analysis of the object, anger is unjustified. And I put that in red because we'll look at that next, on the next slide. And then 2 is on on analysis of the subject, I guess that means yourself, the one getting angry. Anger is unjustified. Then 3, on analysis of the basis, anger is unjustified. Okay, so next slide, we'll look at the analysis of the object. And this has 4 parts. So the object would mean, the object towards whom we're getting angry. And I thought it might be helpful while going through these points, if you can think of an actual incident where you got angry. You got angry at some other person who was acting harmfully, did something harmful to you. It could have been verbally, they insulted you, criticized you, said negative things towards you, and you were hurt. Or maybe even physically, they may have physically harmed you, or tried to harm you. That's also, even if they try and they don't succeed, we're still, still angry at that. So maybe take a few moments to bring to mind an actual experience where this happened to you. Okay, so there's 4 parts here. And the first one is on analysis of whether the object has self-control. So when analyzing this, we can see that anger is unjustified. So I'll read what Lama Tsongkhapa says here. You might remember this from chapter 6. It's kind of at the beginning of chapter 6, talking about how someone who's angry at us and harming us or trying to harm us doesn't really have control over themselves, but rather they are controlled by conditions. There's causes and conditions that are causing the person to be that way. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, this is on page 160 if you do have your book. At the bottom of the page, he says, analyze, thinking, what would be reasonable grounds for anger towards harm doers? Whereupon you might think, they first had the thought of wanting to harm me, prepared the method, and then either prevented my happiness or inflicted unpleasant physical or mental suffering. So my anger is justified. Right? So you think, oh, they planned it, they wanted to harm me and they thought about it and they planned carefully what they were going to do, and then they carried it out and they made me suffer. And so therefore it's right for me to be angry. It's justified. So then he says, are you angry because, there's 2 possibilities here. The first is, they inflicted harm while they had the self-control not to harm you, right? So they had the choice to harm me or not harm me. They decided to harm me. and they did this with complete control? Or are you angry because they were utterly without any self-control and hurt you while helplessly impelled by something else? So they had no control at all. What they did was without any control. So then he explores these two possibilities. So in the first case, former case, he says, your anger is unjustified because those who inflict harm do not have control over themselves. For when the conditions and causes, seeds left by afflictions to which they were previously habituated, a nearby object, and erroneous conceptions come together, they give rise to the thought to harm. Even though the harm doers do not think, I will feel malice. Whereas if those causes and conditions are not complete, they will never produce the thought to harm, even if they think, I will feel malice. So that's kind of a long sentence there. But he's saying that, someone who inflicts harm doesn't really have control because there are causes and conditions. One is the seeds in their mind, left by afflictions in the past. So in the past, they had afflictions going back to beginningless time. Right? So we all have the seeds of afflictions in our mind: ignorance, attachment, anger, all the afflictions there. They've been in our mind from beginningless time, and they leave seeds to continue having those same afflictions again and again, just like with plants, just like with the weeds, right? Last year's weeds, they died over the winter, but they left seeds in the ground, and so as soon as it rains, this year's weeds come up all over the place, and they just keep spreading. So in a similar way with the weeds, we have the seeds of afflictions in our mind that keep proliferating, life after life, year after year, day after day. So this harm doer, this person who caused you harm, that's the situation with them. They just have these seeds of afflictions in their mind. And then second is a nearby object. So when there's some object that they perceive, and that triggers the affliction to arise. And then erroneous conceptions, that's like, what does Venerable call those? Exaggeration, sometimes it's called superstition, just stories, like telling stories, yeah? We do it too, so we can look at our experience. We see some object, and maybe it's the first time you ever saw that person, first time you ever met that person, but you feel this immediate aversion, irritation, dislike, and your mind starts telling stories. You don't even know them, right? That ever happened to you? I mean, they talk about love at first sight, but there's also hatred at first sight. It's like your mind just starts telling all these stories about that person. So that's the meaning of erroneous conceptions, right? Just that tendency in the mind to tell stories. So the harm doer, a person who did harm to you, this is the situation with them. They had the seeds of afflictions. There was an object, you, me, that set off their mind this tendency to, maybe we didn't do anything to that person, but somehow, or maybe it's past karma, right? We harmed them in the previous life. Or just something about us triggered their irritation, their aversion, their dislike, and their mind just started telling stories. So there's these causes and conditions, and there's lots of other causes and conditions as well. Maybe they had a bad day, the weather's bad, they're not feeling good. So many things can affect us and trigger negative emotions coming up in our mind, and then you just want to, take it out. And also habit. if they have that habit of being angry and aggressive, yeah, then that makes it easier to do it again and again. So these are the causes and conditions for the person reacting in that way, getting angry and then wanting to do harm. So, so this was the case with the other person, so that caused them to give rise to the thought to harm. He says this can happen even if they never have the thought, I want to feel malice. So they didn't wake up in the morning thinking, I want to have malice today. I want to feel malice today. You know, it probably isn't the case. And that they had that intention, but it just happened. Causes and conditions came together and poof, it happened in their mind. And he says, if those causes and conditions are not complete, right, they will not have the thought to harm, even if they want to. Even if they wake up in the morning and say, I want to have malice today. But if the causes and conditions don't come together, that won't happen, right? So he's just pointing out that, yeah, and he says in the next sentence, these causes and conditions produce the desire to harm. This in turn produces the work of harming, the actual actions that they do to give harm, and this produces suffering for someone else, me. So those harm doers do not have even the slightest self-control. So, I mean, it takes time to contemplate this. It's really good to spend time, take an actual situation. You could think of something that happened in the past and think about this, how that person just had no control over themselves. They were under the control of all these different causes and conditions. Or think about things going on in the world today. Yeah. I won't mention names, but yeah, people who do harmful things, they're under the control of all these. These are some of the conditions. There's lots of other conditions as well, like what's going on in the country, what other people are doing and saying, and so many factors, so many causes and conditions influencing those people to make that decision to do something harmful. So they really don't have control. And if they knew about karma, right, if they had the understanding of karma and believed in karma, then that would make a difference as well. Hopefully that would make a difference. They wouldn't do the things they're doing, realizing they're bringing harm on themselves. They could see the future, what lies in store for them when their karma ripens. And then he says, moreover, they have become like servants of their afflictions because they are under the control of others, i.e. their afflictions. Okay, so this is an answer to the idea that they had control. These people who harmed me were in control, complete control. That's not the case. And then the second possibility is, he says, in the latter case, you are angry because the harm doers are utterly without any self-control and being helplessly impelled by something else, they hurt you. Then your anger is totally unjustified. For instance, some people who have been possessed by demons and have come under their control may wish to hurt those who are helping them to get free of their demons and thereupon beat them, and so on. So we don't have, you may not believe in this idea of people getting possessed by demons or spirits. So if you have trouble believing that, then you could think of mental illness, because it's kind of similar, right? Lots of cases of people who have schizophrenia or psychoses, all these kind of mental illnesses that, again, sort of take over their mind, possess their mind, and then impel them to act in ways that are violent, aggressive, harming others. And people who take care of people like that, and the doctors, psychiatrists, and so on, they just know the person is acting that way because of their mental illness. And so they don't take it personally, they don't get angry and want to hurt them in return. Instead, they want to help them. Okay, so they do whatever they can to help these people be cured of their illness if possible, or at least get some medication that will, what's the word? Neutralize the symptoms so they're not behaving that way. So that is possible, yeah. So that they can live a normal life. So anyway, they don't get angry, and this is what he says here. Their helpers, the helpers of such people, think they do this because their demons or their mental illness have eliminated their ability to control themselves and do not have even the slightest anger toward them. They then strive to the best of their ability to free them from their demons, from their mental illness. Likewise, when bodhisattvas are hurt by others, they think they do this because the demons of the afflictions have eliminated their ability to control themselves. Without being even the slightest bit angry with those persons, they then must generate the spirit of enlightenment, thinking, I will strive at the bodhisattva deeds in order to free them from these afflictions. Accordingly, Aryadeva's 400 stanzas says, just as a doctor does not fight, but helps patients who are possessed by spirits, though they get angry, who gets angry? Not clear. So the sage sees that the afflictions are at fault, not the persons who have the afflictions. And the Master Chandrakirti also states, this is not living beings' fault, rather it is the fault of the afflictions. So the learned analyze and do not fight with others. Right, so if you have a really good understanding that it's the afflictions in the minds of harm doers that are sort of controlling them and impelling them to act in that way, then you blame the afflictions and not the person. It's the fault of the afflictions in their minds. So that's a really, really helpful way of learning to not be angry at those who do harm and instead have compassion. Just like doctors with patients suffering from mental illness, they have compassion. They want to help these people. They can see how much they're suffering. They don't have control over themselves, so they just want to help them. And there's some texts that talk about like imagining your mother in that situation, right? Your mother who was, brought you into the world and cared for you when you were small and helpless and did so many things, like countless things, countless acts of kindness for you. And imagine her in that situation of becoming mentally ill and then, acting angry and violent, even maybe trying to attack you and hurt you. So if it's your mother and you understand that it's this is because of the mental illness that she's acting that way, and it's not her normal way of being, so you wouldn't get angry at her. You wouldn't want to fight back and hurt her, right? So that's a really helpful image to think of, and then think that it's the same with anybody else. Even if it's not your mother of this lifetime, but anybody else who's in that kind of behaving in that way. It's just like they're under the control of afflictions. So it's just not justified to get angry at them and then want to attack them in return, fight them, hurt them in return. So that's really helpful. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, although many reasonings are set forth in engaging in the bodhisattva deeds, it is easy to be certain of this one, and it is a very powerful remedy for anger. You know, maybe that's why it comes first. Also, the bodhisattva levels, that's a text by a Sangha, has the same meaning where it states that you cannot bear harm after you meditate on the idea of mere phenomena. Sorry, you can bear harm. Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me today. You can bear harm after you meditate on the idea of mere phenomena. So I'm not sure what that means, but maybe it means like dependent arising, how phenomena are all dependent on other things. So if you think about the causes and conditions giving rise to this situation, then that helps you to bear harm. So meditate repeatedly on this remedy until you reach certain knowledge of it. And then he says, if these beings had self-control, they would not have any suffering, because they would not want suffering and because they could control it. Yeah, so if beings who do harmful things were in control of themselves, did have control over themselves, they wouldn't do these things because they just cause suffering to themselves. Nobody wants suffering, and so nobody would do the things that bring suffering on themselves. So that's another way of thinking that they don't really have self-control. And then he says, furthermore, you should stop your anger by also thinking, when these beings are moved by strong afflictions, they commit suicide, leap from cliffs, harm themselves with thorns, weapons, and so forth, and stop eating and so forth. If they do this to even their greatly cherished and dear selves, of course they will hurt others. So that's again from Shantideva. He talks about that. Now, look at, I mean, also in the world today, you know, people inflict harm on themselves, kill themselves or cut themselves, burn themselves. Sometimes religious people, there's certain religions that have these practices of harming oneself. And so if that happens, if people even harm themselves due to afflictions, their mind being overtaken by afflictions, confusion, mental illness, and so on, then it's understandable they would also do harm to others, like me. Yeah, so that's a really powerful method. And then he has some quotes from Shantideva, but want me to read those? Okay. Doesn't hurt to hear those again. Shantideva says, thus everything is dependent on something else, and because that in turn is dependent, it is not autonomous. Nothing is totally autonomous, independent of everything else. Understanding this, do not be angry at anything, all things being like illusions. Illusions in the sense that they may appear to be independently existing, autonomously existing, but that isn't the case. That's like an illusion. And then also, therefore, if you see an enemy or a friend doing what is wrong, think, this arises from certain conditions, and remain happy. If all beings could achieve results according to their wish, then since no one wants suffering, no one would suffer. And also, while under the control of their afflictions, some people will kill even their dear selves. So how can you expect them not to harm the bodies of others? Right? Okay, so that's the first method, which is very, very helpful. We're working on our anger. And at the moment when it's happening, right? Someone is yelling at you, screaming at you, or trying to harm you in some way. It can be hard to think about this unless your mind is really familiar with it. If you've spent time meditating on this and you get really, really, really familiar with it, then you can immediately bring it up and remember it and be able to remain calm in the situation where the person's harming you. But if you're not at that point, and you're just like faced with this person who's angry at you and trying to harm you, then try to at least not react. Try to remember the faults of anger, and like, I don't know if it's mentioned here, but in Shanideva's text, he talks about turning to stone, becoming like a piece of wood. Yeah, just be non-reactive, like freeze. Don't, control yourself so that you don't act out anger. And then later, when you're away from that person, away from that situation, you calm down and you have some time to think about it, then you can sit down and contemplate these ideas. And that can be really helpful to cool yourself down. But also then you can think about, okay, if this happens again, if I meet that person again, or a similar situation happens again, I want to remember these points so that I don't, ideally don't even feel angry, but can feel compassion. So the more we contemplate these points, and train our minds to think in these ways, the more they become just natural, and then kind of easily they'll come to mind, even in those kind of situations. So this is what we need to do, really familiarize ourselves with these ideas so that they're just right there. We can immediately remember them. So the second one is kind of funny language here. An analysis of, what happened? Oh, I think we need to go back to, Second one is an analysis for either adventitiousness or inherency. Anger is unjustified. So you'll remember this as soon as I start reading it. It says, the fault of doing harm to others either is or is not in the nature of living beings. If it is in their nature, it is wrong to get angry, just as it is wrong to get angry at fire for being hot and burning. So what this means is, a particular person who's acting harmfully towards us, we analyze, is it their nature to be that way? Like, is that part of their personality? That is just their way of being. They've been like that for a long time, right? That's the case. I mean, when he talks about nature here, this doesn't mean inherently. It's not that the person is inherently bad-tempered or, aggressive and so on. But in this life, or maybe for many years, the person has been that way. And it's, again, probably because of causes and conditions. Things that happened when they were a kid or when they were growing up or whatever. Karma from past lives. So some people are kind of just naturally more bad-tempered, angry, aggressive, and so on and so forth. That's kind of their nature to be that way. That's their personality to be that way. So if that's the case, if you think in that way, then he's saying it's not justified to be angry, because that would be like getting angry at fire for being hot and burning. Right? It's just the nature of fire to be hot and burning. And we're taught that when we're little kids, because our mother doesn't want us to get burned, and we also don't want that. It's painful. So we're taught, don't touch the fire, don't touch, a hot pan after it's been on the stove. Don't touch those things, it hurts. And so we learn that, and then we do our best to stay away from fire, don't get close to fire. It's just the nature of fire to be like that. So we have to just be careful when we're around fire, right? So in the same way, if there's a person whose nature is to be hot and burning, I'll be careful around that person, not get too close, not say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, because that's going to trigger their, So it doesn't make sense to be angry at them and blame them for that. That's just kind of their way of being, right? So that's really helpful. Then, second is similar. So that's, I think, the meaning of the term inherency, which is a little strange. But anyways, it's just like, it's the nature of the person to be that way. And then the second one is adventitiousness. So he says, similarly, if it is adventitious, it is also wrong to be angry, just as when smoke and the like appear in the sky, it is wrong to be angry at the sky on account of these flaws of smoke and so forth. So adventitiousness means it's not in the nature of this person to be that way. Some people are just, they don't get angry very often. They're really calm and peaceful, kind, well-behaved. That's their nature. But sometimes they do get angry. Sometimes they get, their buttons get pushed. And so if you analyze and you think that that's the case, it's not in their nature, but causes and conditions have come together and they're getting angry. But that's not, the way they are kind of permanently. So again, it doesn't make sense to get angry at them. He's saying that would be like getting angry at the sky when there's clouds or pollution going through the sky. That's not the nature of the sky. It's not the nature of the sky to be polluted. Pollution comes from human beings, not from the sky. So you can't blame the sky for the pollution. And likewise, clouds form for other reasons. There's moisture. I don't know what all the causes and conditions are for clouds, but that's also not the sky's fault. The sky didn't choose to have clouds in it. So it doesn't make sense to get angry at the sky for having clouds or pollution. So this again, takes some time to think about. But when we do, then that's really helpful to see that it doesn't make sense to be angry at somebody, whether it's in their nature to be bad-tempered and harmful, or it's adventitious. Just they're having a bad day. And then quoting from Shantideva, he says, if doing harm to others is natural for the childish, meaning a childish person childish person means, they're not sort of spiritually mature, but they're still under the control of afflictions. So if it's natural for a person to be harmful, then it's wrong to get angry at them, just as it is at fire's burning nature. And then he says, still, if the fault is adventitious and the nature of beings is good, my anger is wrong, just as is anger at smoke's appearance in the sky. So anyway, those are Those ideas come from Shantideva. Okay, then the third one is an analysis of whether the harm is direct or indirect. Anger is just unjustified. So I won't read the book, but just summarize. So this refers to Shantideva's wonderful example of the stick. And yeah, if somebody picks up a stick and hits you with a stick, do you get angry at the stick? Because that's the thing that actually causes pain, right? It's the stick that hurts and causes a wound and pain. But do we get angry at the stick? Because we think, no, it was it wasn't the stick, the fault of the stick, but the person who wielded the stick and hit me with it. So we get angry at the person. And then Shantideva says, but then why did the person do that? What forced the person or caused the person to hit me with a stick? It was their afflictions in their mind, anger, hatred, aggressiveness in their mind that caused them to pick up the stick and hit me with it. So just as we don't blame the stick because we say it was wielded by the person, we also shouldn't blame the person because they were wielded by their afflictions. So the real fault is the afflictions in the mind of the person. And so it doesn't make sense to be angry at the person just as it doesn't make sense to be angry at the stick. So I think he calls this direct or indirect, because I think the direct cause of the harm was the stick, but we don't get angry at that. We get angry at the person, but also the person wasn't at fault. It was really their afflictions. So it's kind of indirect. There's a few steps there. Anger comes up in their mind, and they think, I'm going to pick up this stick and hit them. And so, yeah, it's indirect, a few things happening there. So again, it's kind of the same idea that the real problem is the afflictions in the mind of a person that is the main cause for them behaving in the way they do that causes us suffering. So we should really blame the afflictions and not the person. That's unjustified to be angry at the person. And then the fourth point is an analysis of the cause that impels the harm doers. Anger is unjustified. And so here he talks about karma, saying that, and I'll read what he says. The experience of suffering produced by those who harm does not occur causelessly or from discordant causes, so it occurs from concordant causes. That is to say, from non-virtuous actions you have done in the past. So this is looking at our own karma. So it's our own karma that is the cause for this situation to be happening, because if we hadn't done negative actions in the past, we wouldn't have this situation where we are being harmed. Yeah, we did something harmful in the past that created the negative karma. One result of our negative karma is to experience a similar kind of thing that we inflicted on others. We hurt others, and we are going to be hurt by others. So that's the main cause for this situation to come about. And then he says, therefore, harm doers are helplessly impelled to do harm by the power of your karma. Consequently, blame yourself, thinking, this is my fault, and I am wrong to get angry at others, and stop your anger on all occasions. For example, it is similar to the way that beings produce the guardians of hell with their own bad karma, and these guardians then inflict harm on them. So, yeah, this is also from Shantideva, like where the descriptions of hell with these, I don't know what they're called, hell guardians, the hell guardians who are doing all these harmful things to the hell beings. So Shantideva says these are created by our own mind. So it's our own mind, our negative karma. Of course, not deliberately, consciously, we don't do this, but the afflictions in our mind are mainly anger. That would be the main affliction in this case. So our own anger and hatred and harmfulness that we did in the past, we inflicted harm on others, we did horrible things to others. And so those mental factors of ourself and the actions we did motivated by them, those are the cause of these appearances in hell, the hell beings inflicting harm on us. So it's similar in this life as well. When we are in a situation of someone wanting to harm us, actually trying to harm us, so this is created by our own mind, our own anger and hatred. Maybe not in this life, but in past lives. So this is... But I think with this one, it's a little tricky. I mean, it's mainly, this is what we need to think for ourselves. We need to use this method to think about our own situations where we experience harm. But I think we have to be very careful when advising others. Yeah, especially like domestic violence, right? A wife or a girlfriend is being beaten up by their husband or their boyfriend. Yeah, I don't think it would be skillful to say, "Oh, this is your fault. Yeah, you created bad karma, and so that's why it's happening." Because there's, what's that expression? Victim blaming. There's already a lot of that anyway going on in the world. Yeah, blaming the victim for the harm that they're experiencing, and that's not helpful psychologically. So yeah, be careful not to make that suggestion. And also, people often blame themselves. Yeah, they're already blaming themselves, but not in a healthy way, not in this way, as a method to stop being angry with the understanding of karma and dependent arising and so on and so forth, but thinking, I'm a bad person, I'm a horrible person, I deserve this. So that's different. Okay, so we don't want to encourage that way of thinking. So yeah, I think it's mainly for ourselves to apply in our own practice. And of course, if there's someone who is a devout Buddhist and believes in the Buddhist teachings and karma and so on and so forth, we could, in that case, suggest this idea, because the Tibetans found this really helpful when they were being overtaken by the Chinese and put into prison and beaten and tortured. And they had strong belief in karma, strong belief in the Buddhist worldview, and thinking, okay, this is the result of my karma. I did bad things in the past, and that's why this is happening to me. So that really helped them keep their mind in a positive state, not get angry and hateful, and even have compassion. So for one's own practice, this can be really, really helpful. But just be careful when dealing with other people and their problems. Okay, so then, yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe looking for a way to think about this, because it's easy with this inherency on adventitiousness to get also the mind, okay, it's their afflictions. They shouldn't have the affliction. It's a wrong to have the affliction, or to blame oneself. I shouldn't have an affliction. Like I can catch myself too, could get really into this old, maybe Sunday school training that, yeah, they're an angry person and they shouldn't be, right? Right, so that it doesn't go in the direction that that antidote should take my mind, if I can get beyond that judgment itself for having them.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is uncommon.
Yeah, and I guess again, the Buddhist worldview versus the Christian worldview. The Christian worldview, we're created by God, and we're, of course we have original sin, but still we're created in the image of God. So yeah, we should be good. We should, be like God and the angels and the saints and just holy and pure and so on, not angry. But that's different than the Buddhist worldview, where we weren't created by God, perfect being, but we have always existed in a state of ignorance and confusion and delusions, and that's just from beginningless time. No one created this situation. It's just always been. I mean, that's hard to understand, hard to accept. But anyway, it's just like, it's always been that way. And we never became free of it. We never managed to free ourselves from our confusion and our afflictions and so on. And there's nobody to blame. You can't really blame anybody. It's just always been that way. So no point trying to figure out where it all came from and why and so on and so forth. But just like the Buddha said, don't worry about that, but focus on now. I have these afflictions and there are antidotes, and I have learned the antidotes, so let's just use them and get myself out. And the other person, and then the whole thing about Buddha nature is really helpful as well. Yes, I have afflictions, they have afflictions, but that they're adventitious. They're not permanent. They're not who we are permanently for all of time. We have Buddha nature, we have all these positive qualities, positive potential. So if we we practice the Dharma, we can get free of all of our afflictions. And that person also can become free of all their afflictions. They're not like permanent, inherent parts of us. So those thoughts can help counteract that. Those old ways of thinking. Yeah, it takes time, especially if we have been exposed to other ways of thinking in our early childhood. They say the things we learn as children, are really kind of stamped in our mind. And not easy, even if we decide, I don't want to follow that religion anymore. But, we're still affected by it. So it's good to recognize that, good to recognize the differences. Okay, this is what I was told as a child. This is a different way of thinking, different way of explaining things, and just gradually get used to this new way, and then the old way will eventually fade and hopefully disappear. But yeah, it takes time. Any other questions about any of these?
I find that the points about how to look at what's going on in the world in the minds of the folks in power, like me, they're under the control of affliction, have this kind of mental illness. They don't have any wherewithal. They're being dragged through the mud about this. That helps my mind to not demonize them and be so angry with them. But they still are right now in power doing what they're doing. So then I've got to piggyback that with the idea that this is a collective karma as a people that we're also experiencing the results of. So I can't just take, there's definitely ways of looking at when harm is coming to individuals or groups to use more than one or two antidotes, because sometimes I can get stuck and then still get angry because they're still in charge even though they're really out of control. What do? Well, this is another piece that helps me to put it in a bigger perspective. So sometimes using a few of these things piggybacked on one another helps me to keep my mind a little bit more balanced rather than getting really flustered and overwhelmed.
And why are they in those positions? There's always people who support them in a democratic country. There's a vote, so people voted. Yeah. There's a lot of people who voted for that person to be in power and who still believe in that person being the right person to do the job. So yeah, thinking that way too, you can't put all the blame on them.
Well, His Holiness says in the Ethics for a New Millennium, he says our politicians don't fall out of the sky, that they're actually a result of the collective societal ethical framework and ethical, minds of those that put them in power. So.
And then you look at history, so many things happened over time, and that also influenced the situation, the society, and people's minds, and so on. So many factors. It's just like, I find it really helpful to think that way, because then you realize it's less reason to blame that one person. Yeah. There's something else that popped up in my mind while you were talking, I forgot what it was. Okay, maybe it'll come back. Anyone else have a question or comment? Okay, so we can move on. The next point, the next slide, on analysis of the subject, anger is unjustified. So here it talks about how if we get angry at a harm doer because we can't bear the suffering, it's contradictory. Because if we get angry and retaliate, we are creating the cause to experience even more suffering, worse suffering in the future. Like, especially if we're born in unfortunate realms, and we'll be stuck there for a long time and experience a lot of suffering. And so it's like saying, I can't stand this suffering that this person is inflicting on me. It's unbearable, which, yeah, good reason to. But if we think about, if I get angry and retaliate with anger towards this person, hurt them in return, what kind of karma am I creating? And what will be the result of that karma when it ripens in the future? It's going to be worse suffering, more suffering than what is happening to me right now. So does that make sense? Right? I mean, it's reasonable to say, I don't want to suffer. I shouldn't have to suffer. Suffering is an aberration. Yeah, but how are we going to deal with this? I mean, it doesn't mean you have to just sit there and let yourself be beaten up, abused. But the point is, this is what we're looking at here is ways to stop anger and retaliation, wanting to retaliate, give harm for harm. So we can still do things to get ourselves out of that situation, to stop the person from harming us, if that's possible. That wasn't possible in the case of the Tibetans. They were trapped. They were in prison. They were under the control of the Chinese police and soldiers and so on. So they had no power to stop the suffering, the harm that was coming to them. So they just the only thing they had control over was their mind. And the same is true for many people around the world who are imprisoned, tortured, beaten, and so on. So they can't control the situation. They can't control the people doing harm to them, but they can control their own mind. And I've read stories of people doing amazing things, being able to manage their minds in those situations, because that's the only thing you can do, the only thing you can manage if you don't want to get angry. And this is the point here, how to stop ourselves from getting angry and retaliating. But if we can get ourselves out of the situation, like Shantideva says, if there is a remedy, a solution, then do it. Follow it. So, get yourself out of that situation, stop the person from harming you. That's completely fine. But the point here is not getting angry, to do it without anger and hatred and the desire to take revenge and harm that person. So that's what we're looking at here. So this particular method is this one is really good too, really powerful. And then Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to talk about how the suffering that we are experiencing due to the harm doer's actions is the result of our own negative karma. And by experiencing it, by going through this suffering, we exhaust that karma. We're finishing that karma, like paying off the debt, karmic debt. So that is helpful too, to think, oh, yeah, this is bad, but I'm paying off my debts, reducing my karmic debt. And so that can give you some consolation in the situation. And also, on top of that, if we can bear the suffering with patience, then we avoid creating more negative karma, and instead we create merit, virtue, because practicing patience is virtuous. So being able to practice patience or fortitude or tolerance, whatever you want to call it, practicing that is virtuous. We're creating virtue, we're creating merit. So this gives us, in this situation, person harming us gives us a fantastic opportunity to create virtue, to create merit, and increase our patience, to make ourselves more habituated, more familiar with patience. And then that will build up in the future. We can become more and more and more and more patient. And of course, it's one of the perfections of a bodhisattva, one of the main practices of a bodhisattva. So it's a cause for enlightenment, progressing on the bodhisattva path and reaching enlightenment. So looked at in that point, from that point of view, this is like, wow. And they say like, oh, the person who harms us is helping us, providing us with this great opportunity to get rid of some bad karma and create good karma, create merit, virtue, practice patience, get more familiar with patience, less familiar with anger. Wow, what a great opportunity this is. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm not at that point yet, but if you think about these ideas and maybe try them out as well, you can eventually get to the point where, you can feel, this is fantastic. This is a great opportunity. So, they say harm doers are kind and helpful, like great teachers. What's that verse in the 8 verses? What are those verses? I think it's number 6. Someone I have benefited and in whom I have placed great trust hurts me very badly. I will practice seeing that person as my most supreme teacher. Good to memorize those, then greater chance that they'll pop up in our mind in those kind of situations. And then also, this kind of situation is compared to going through some unpleasant medical treatment in order to be cured of an illness. That's really helpful too. Like, we've probably all had that experience of having to get surgery or some other sort of unpleasant medical treatment that doesn't really feel very good, or even a vaccine, right? Getting a COVID vaccine, that's a little bit painful, and some people had bad reactions. They were sick for a couple of days, but we put up with that, thinking, wow, this will protect me from COVID, which would be far worse. I'd have a lot more suffering if I got that. So we put up with this little bit of relatively small amount of discomfort or unpleasant experiences to avoid something worse, something bigger. So it's a similar idea here, putting up with this difficult situation of this person being angry and wanting to harm me. But if I do it in the right way, use it as an opportunity to practice patience, not get angry, not create more bad karma, I'm creating virtue. And that will be the cause for good things in the future. There will be good results if I practice in that way. So it will help me avoid suffering and experience good things in the future. So I'll stop there. So there's some more points we'll do next week. Any last questions or comments or stories? Selden?
I find it very helpful with people that, that I don't always get along with, to think of that they aren't, like you said earlier, that they aren't this affliction, that, that they aren't angry, they're inherently angry, they have been kind and they have, other good traits. It's not just this one trait in this moment that's coming out.
Yeah, that's really helpful too, to realize, to think of times when that person wasn't angry and wasn't harmful and maybe was even kind and helpful. So then, it's not like permanent inherently the way they are. Just because of causes and conditions, this situation has come about, but it's impermanent. It will pass, it will change, the person will change. So get used to that way of thinking too, because we tend to just focus on this one moment. The person is like that right now, and it can almost seem like they've been like that forever, they will be like that forever. It's like, wait a minute, is that true? It really shows how our mind really sees things in distorted ways, distorts reality. Okay, so we'll stop there because, there's something else happening at 11. And so let's dedicate the merit, the positive energy of what we have done in this past hour and a half. Create a lot of virtue. Let's share that with all other beings.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lusang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.